You know, we've been following closely the Colorado movie theater massacre trial, and there are some new developments to report today. There's a state psychiatrist who evaluated James Holmes, and he's been testifying that he believes he is mentally ill, but he knew right from wrong when he opened fire in that movie theater in 2012. Jurors have watched 22 hours of video over 6 days of the doctor questioning Holmes. Dr. William Reed telling jurors that Holmes did not suffer, as he has alleged, from delusions.
I want to ask you if you formed an opinion as to whether or not the defendant was floridly psychotic or suffered some psychotic break on July 19th and or 20th of 2012.
My opinion is that there is no indication at all that I know of that Mr. Holmes was, I'm going to use the phrase, floridly psychotic.
Joining us now, Ashley Merchant, a criminal defense attorney, and Anna Yum is a former prosecutor. Ladies, welcome. You almost need to be a psychiatrist to understand the distinctions that the doctor is making. But let me ask you, Ashley, the burden of proof is somewhat interesting in Colorado. Who has the burden of proving sanity or insanity in this case?
Well, it's a death penalty case, so that's a little bit different for us. The state actually has to prove that he knew the difference between right or wrong at the time that he committed the offense. And so what we normally understand as a mental illness, it can overwhelm you and it can be an influence in your actual case, but if it doesn't rise to the level of you not knowing the difference between right or wrong, it doesn't help you in a criminal case. And so that's a criminal standard, whether or not the defendant actually knew the difference between right or wrong at the time that he committed the offense.
So it's actually that time. His behavior could be bizarre before, and we've seen it many times in cases where the behavior is bizarre after, but it's that very moment. But Anna, I remember being on the air when the police were searching, and we have some video to show our viewers to remind them, the home, the apartment of this suspect that had been booby-trapped. A complicated pattern of wires and explosives that didn't happen overnight. How influential is that in a case like this, that a suspect went to the trouble of, perhaps if he didn't return home and cops did, that someone would be severely injured or killed?
I think it's extremely influential, Jamie. And in fact, I think Dr. Reed is proving to be a powerful prosecution witness. I think that's his main point, is that James Holmes planned this in advance. He hid this planning from his treating doctor, Dr. Fenton. He purposely wore body armor. He purposely when he tried to use a cell phone, he made it seem like he used a cell phone to step out of the theater and put a metal clamp on the door, presumably to prevent people from escaping and to prevent people from coming in to stop him. Dr. Reed's main point is that these are things that a person with rational thought processes, a person who plans it in advance, not someone who doesn't know the difference between right or wrong. And if I'm the prosecutor, of course, I'm arguing that these are telltale signs of a cold, premeditated attack of a killing, as opposed to someone who was legally insane at the time.
This particular jury has sat through 22 hours of interviews of James Holmes. Ashley, because we can suspect at this point he's not going to take the stand, but they're getting a pretty good sense of his mind, his state of mind, and what his intent was and motive by those interviews. But that's an awful lot of information for a jury to process. How difficult is it for an attorney on a case like this in defense mode to get a jury to focus just on what they think is relevant?
Well, this is very difficult because it's essentially a battle of the experts. You've got the state's expert, and you've listened to actual testimony of Mr. Holmes, just not on the stand. They've had to listen to this actual testimony of his. So that's helpful to the defense because it helps personalize Mr. Holmes. It helps them actually see him as a person, so that's important in the death penalty phase, if we get to the death penalty phase. But at this point, it's very damaging for them to see how much he suffered from mental illness, because they're going to be scared of him. They're not going to want to let him out, and so they're going to be more likely to convict him based on listening to this very disturbing testimony that he's giving through this doctor.
I would think, Anna, given the strong burden of proof the prosecutor has in this case, it's difficult to know when to actually rest.
Yes, I agree with you in that. It's difficult to know when to rest given these facts or circumstances, but I think they're using building blocks by virtue of Dr. Reed's testimony. Because keep in mind, Dr. Reed was a court-appointed expert. It wasn't an expert that was retained by the prosecution. And to gather on Ashley's point about personalizing the defendant, I think that this video, if anything, shows to the jury that he had the intent, that he knew what he was doing at the time, and that he had rational thought processes. For instance, he told Dr. Reed that he purposely did not shoot at the officers when he got apprehended because he didn't want to get shot at, and his mission was accomplished. These are thought processes that someone who doesn't know the difference between right or wrong, they don't necessarily think that way. So I think the prosecution is making good advances right now in trying to prove their case.
Yeah, a very, very interesting witness who says he has a psychotropic or psychiatric disease, but possibly not full schizophrenia. For this jury to determine the difference and make a judgment, my hat's off to them, and I commend them for their service. And thanks to both of you as well for clarifying it all.
Thank you.
We'll continue
Thanks,
to follow
Jamie.
the case. John?